Okay, folks, we're looking at city conflicts that happen when a city develops and expands. So the key ones we're looking at are going to be unfair tax burden, land use disagreement, and conflict with nature. Those are the big ones ultimately that happen. When we look at how a city expands, often we think of it, we're back to that set of circles, and that it's an even expansion each step of the way. In reality, it's often more of sort of a wonky looking. There we go. So what happens is we've got our central business, we've got our increasing area out to the suburbs, but we have rural here. And as a city gets larger, it expands out into the rural space. And in some areas, it develops faster, and in others, it doesn't go as quickly. And what can happen is as that development is expanding, this is where we end up with our conflicts. So sometimes that's a conflict of just interpreting, what seems to be fair or unfair. So the most common one that we're going to start with is looking at what happens suburbs compared to downtown. So downtown has high density, lots of people on a footprint of, say, a kilometer squared. Out far suburbs and rural, it's low density. 1 kilometer square, it might just be one house and a person. So between those two areas, when we look at something like taxes and people paying taxes for their property and their land, the taxes for property downtown tend to be really high, and the taxes out further suburbs tend to be a fair bit lower. That in and of itself isn't a huge problem, except that there are things that people want and feel that they should have that don't necessarily fit with what they're paying. So if you're paying lots of taxes, you are expecting bus service, water, snow removal, garbage removal. Those are the services you're paying for and you expect. If you're far out and you're not paying as much taxes, but you're still part of the same city, you want those things as well. Except that your taxes won't cover the cost of bringing these things out to where you are in the suburbs. If a city's not planned properly, if we have that expansion and it's done quickly and people aren't really thinking these things through, this becomes one of the problems. If you know anyone who lives to the far edges of the city, they probably get their water on a well. They're one of the last places to get the snow removal. Their garbage should be about the same in terms of pickup. And the bus, they might get the bus once, twice, 3 times during the high peak hour, and then you don't see it again until the end of the day. Where in the high density, you've got all kinds of people riding the bus. So one of the conflicts we're looking at is an unfair tax burden, and it's that difference of suburbs and far suburbs, rural, not paying as much in taxes, but they want all the same services, and the city core, high density, paying the highest taxes, and they tend to have the most services. So that's the first of the conflicts. The next thing we look at is a land use. If we look at 2 homes side by side, and one home has decided that they're going to open a daycare. They're allowed to. The laws say that they can do it. House next door, they're not impressed. They're really upset. They don't think that there should be a daycare next door. They could end up in court and complaining about it. But if the law says it's okay, it should be okay. Another argument that's come up in Halifax City several times now is whether or not you can have chickens. Believe it or not, in Halifax City, you're allowed to have and raise chickens in your backyard. Sometimes the next door neighbors don't want the chickens. They think they're loud, they think they're dirty, they think all kinds of problems. So if you have two neighbors with two additional businesses and they're not happy about each other, that becomes a conflict of how the land is getting used. Then we have areas that people like to live in. People love to live near the woods. They like to walk the paths and have access to that kind of nature. A large amount of that isn't necessarily owned by the government. So if you know Mount St. Vincent University, the top of that property, there used to be a set of woods. It's all gone now, and the people in the area were so upset, but it wasn't their property. So a land developer had every right to cut the trees down and to create what's going to be new homes at some point. So lots of people disagreed with that and felt that it should have been saved. So that's a use of land. That's a conflict around that. And then we have moving out rurally. If we go way far rurally, here we go. We're quite a ways out of the city, and remember that zone, circle, once you start to bump into nature, you start to have conflicts with, here we go, that's a scary coyote, and now we have a scary bear. They're very scary. So we now have people living in places where these animals, it was their home. But now that the houses are there, they don't want these animals there. So they will call, complain, set traps, and sometimes kill those animals because what's more important to them is where they're living. Rather than trying to find a balance between the two, coyotes, if you've been on any of the city trails, there are signs that talk about what to do in case you're approached by a coyote. Better to live with nature than to try and take it all over, I suspect. So this is a conflict with nature situation. And if we go back to one of our more rural areas, and near to that rural area could be a farm. And the thing with farms is they have animals on them. They have pigs, they have chickens. I don't know if you've ever driven by a pig farm or a chicken farm. They smell awful. But this is food that we eat. So what'll happen is a farm will exist first, and then the house comes. Then the new subdivision comes in, and the wind blows the wrong way, and everyone gets very upset about the smell of this farm. And there have been cases where farms are closed down. The other thing that can happen is you have your suburb and rural area, and the laws haven't changed for how you use the land out there. And then something sets up close by. Well, now, what you thought was your quiet neighborhood has a speedway right there. Loads of noise, loads of people. And it's even possible the speedway existed first and this came after, but they're in conflict with each other. So that can also cause a whole lot of problems. And usually it's because we have urban sprawl, because the laws and the regulations don't catch up to what's happening with the development. So it may be that this was always allowed to be there, and no one kind of thought that through. Wait a minute, what if this new subdivision goes there? So you'll have large rural areas of land that people sell, or they've been in families and then they sell, and new development goes up. Speedways, they make a lot of money. People don't want to live next door to them now. So when we look at the different kinds of conflict, we are back to the unfair tax burden, and that's the people not paying as much taxes but wanting all the same services. The land use disagreement, well, no, there shouldn't be a speedway right next to me, or don't chop down all the trees. And conflict with nature, that's the scary bear, very scary bear, coming into your backyard. So that's part of the set of conflicts that go with city and development of city and expanding of cities. There you go.